All right, joining me once again here on the Matthew Filipowicz Show is Antonia Juhasz. Antonia is a writer, an oil policy and energy analyst. Her work has been seen in Rolling Stone, The Nation, The Atlantic. She is the author of the books The Tyranny of Oil and Black Tide, The Devastating Impact of the Gulf Oil Spill, all of which and more you can find at antoniajuhasz.net. You can also follow her on Twitter at Antonia Juhasz. Antonia, thank you so much for being on the show again.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be back.
All right, so Antonia, you recently wrote a really great article for CNN entitled Why Oil Drilling in Ecuador is a Ticking Time Bomb for the Planet. Now, before we get to the oil and the ticking time bomb, which we definitely will get to here, I guess let's begin by discussing kind of the environmental situation right now in Ecuador. It's kind of unique. You were just down there. Tell us a little bit about the area.
Sure. The area that I was in is definitely unique. It's called the Yasuni National Park, and it's considered quite literally the most biodiverse place on Earth. It is a place where the Amazon rainforest intersects with the equator and the Andes Mountains, and this creates just this biological hotspot. There's more tree species in just 1 hectare of the Yasuni than in all of North America combined. There are also more insects in 1 hectare of the forest than just about any other species concentration of anything anywhere. And believe me, that's something you definitely notice when you're down there. But also, mammals and amphibians and birds and just this incredibly beautiful diversity and very important biological diversity. And thick, intact Amazon rainforest. This area is the third piece, so it's very unique in terms of its biodiversity. It's very important because of the intact forest protects our climate, having this rich forest, but then also it's home to the only 2 remaining uncontacted native tribes left in Ecuador, and these are 2 tribes who literally live as they have lived uncontacted from the outside world for the last 5,000 years. They live in this same forest, so that's the area that I had traveled to, quite unique for sure.
Amazing. Yeah. And so that there's literally 2 tribes that are uncontacted, and they have some contact with some other tribes that are sort of on the fringe of that, but they are saying, leave us alone. We want to stay where we are. We're not part of this outside world. Phenomenal stuff. And we'll get to those tribes in a little bit. But so I guess let's take this now to around 2007, because that's when the country of Ecuador actually made a pact with the world that the world's kind of since reneged on. So tell us about that pact and what actually went down.
Sure. So the other piece that makes the Yasuni National Park of Ecuador quite unique is that it also happens to sit on top of the largest pot of oil left in Ecuador. And this oil is in a small area of the park called the ITT area, and that's the acronym for the areas that intersect in the park. And the Correa government of Ecuador was considering drilling in this area, and a global movement responded saying, look, you just can't drill here. It's too important biologically, it's too important ethnically, and our climate really can't take any more drilling anywhere, least of all in a place as important as the Yasuni. And that's because climate scientists have really reached a unanimous consensus articulated by the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change just this last year, that in order to avert the worst of climate catastrophe, about 3/4 of all of the remaining fossil fuels that are in the ground need to stay in the ground. So the Yasuni was really put up as a test case to say, okay, look, let's leave this oil in the ground. Let's protect our climate by leaving the oil in the ground. Let's protect our climate by not deforesting this incredibly important forest area. And let's make a global commitment to it. And Correa picked up the idea and said, okay, if I leave this oil in the ground, the world has to help me do that. I'm a poor country. I'm the head of a poor country. I want the money from the oil to help my country. So if the world wants me to leave it in the ground, then pay me. And what he asked for in 2007 was half the value of the oil in this area put up by the world. If the world would put up $3.6 billion, he'd leave the oil in the ground indefinitely. And come October of 2013, last year, the world had not put up the money, and he said, and then the government agreed that they were going to start drilling and that they would allow drilling to take place in this area. It hasn't happened yet, so I went there to say, what's at stake if this really does fall through and drilling really does take place? What's at stake in this area? The just sort of hopeful note before we leave it there, though, is that Ecuador has an incredibly important constitution that provides for the protection of the rights of nature, that nature itself has its own rights that need to be protected. And so the people of Ecuador are in the midst of this really amazing signature drive to get a referendum on stopping drilling in the Yasuni brought before the population, to say, using the Constitution to say, if we the people say that this drilling shouldn't take place, and the Constitution supports us in that. And right now they're about halfway through with the signatures they need to get that national referendum called.
That's positive news. And again, I'm talking to Antonia Juhasz about her article for CNN, Why Oil Drilling in Ecuador is a Ticking Time Bomb for the Planet. What's really kind of crazy about this is actually, it seems that the government of Ecuador is, in asking for half of the amount of the oil, was actually being fairly reasonable. They weren't asking even for the full amount. And what seems to be really frustrating about this is, when it comes to the global economy, I mean, $3.6 billion is a lot of money, but when it comes to like all the money that's spent, it's actually kind of pocket change. We're not talking about trillions and trillions of dollars here. This is something would be a kind of a small investment to make in order to that the globe could make in order to make just a dent in trying to stop catastrophic climate change. It's kind of the question is, how are they stalling on this, and why hasn't such a small sliver of money in the big picture of things not been able to be found and put up to keep this from happening?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a brilliant proposal, and there's no reason. First of all, it should still work in Ecuador, and we should still save the Yasuni National Forest. But, if tragically this proposal isn't able to do that, I don't think the idea should go away. The idea that poor communities or poor governments should be supported by the global community in rejecting using oil as a tool for development is a brilliant idea, because oil as a tool for development doesn't really work anyway. There's something very famous known as the resource curse, which is particularly true for oil, which is that non-industrialized countries that pursue oil as a development plan tend to have it ending up being more of a curse than a blessing, meaning they tend to be more poor and more prone towards conflict, not richer and more peaceful as a result of using oil. So it's a really bad development model, in addition to the fact that it destroys the planet. And so what happened in this case is a couple things. One is 2007, something big happened in 2008. We had a global financial meltdown. So countries weren't really keen at that moment to put up money for anything. In addition, the cost, the value of a barrel of oil doubled between 2007 and 2008. So the amount of money that Correa was asking for in 2007 probably didn't look quite as generous to him in 2008. And one of the things that we saw is that Correa, unfortunately, was pursuing two tracks simultaneously. One was, if the world puts up this money, I won't drill. But the other one was, I'm going to get ready to drill. And so he was courting contracts with the Chinese, for example, at the same time, for drilling in this area. At the same time, he was asking the world for money not to drill. And many Ecuadorians I talk to, those who are most concerned about protecting this area, point to that and say, look, he never really gave this a chance. And if we really just focused on saving this area, we think we could do it, and we think we could get the world to cough up the money. And I think looking at the fact that this initiative was ultimately backed by the United Nations, that model can still work. The United Nations holds the money The United Nations works with the local government to make sure that the plan can be implemented, and then delivers the money to the national government. I think it's still a model that should be tried elsewhere. And there are communities all across the United States and the world that are making decisions not to drill. And these are largely communities that can afford essentially to say no to oil and natural gas production on their own. They don't need outside financial support to make that decision, but there's going to be some places that will need outside financial support. And I think we really need to continue the idea that this is something that the world should still consider doing.